My name is Brittany, and I'm 28 now. I often think about how different my life could have been if Mom hadn't gotten sick. She passed away when I was 6, and that's when everything changed. Our house used to be full of her laughter, and photos of our happy family covered every wall. Dad took it really hard. For months, he barely spoke. He just went to work and came back home, where I tried my best to be quiet and not bother him. I didn't really understand death back then. I kept asking when Mom would come back from heaven. Dad would just hug me tight and say nothing. Then he met Sandra at some work event. She started coming over for dinner, and I noticed Dad smiling more. I guess that's why I didn't say anything when, one by one, Mom's photos started disappearing from the walls, replaced by new ones with Sandra in them. "Brittany, Sandra and I have something to tell you," Dad said one evening. They sat me down in our living room, and I remember playing with the hem of my dress, feeling nervous. "Sandra and I are getting married. She's going to live with us and be your new mom. You'll see. Everything will be wonderful." But it wasn't wonderful. As soon as they got back from their honeymoon, Sandra started changing things. She rearranged all the furniture, repainted the walls, and set up what she called house rules. "Brittany, your room is a mess again," she'd say every morning. "A young lady should keep her space tidy. And please keep your voice down when you're playing. I have a headache." I always had to help with chores, even though I was just 6. When I complained to Dad, he'd just say, "Listen to Sandra, honey. She knows what's best for you." One day, I overheard them arguing in their bedroom. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to make out the words. "She's just not adjusting well, John," Sandra was saying. "Maybe it would be better if she lived with your mother. She's always saying how much she misses having family around." "No." Dad's voice was quiet. "I promised Sarah. I promised her before I swore I'd take care of Brittany. And there's the money she left for Brittany's college. I gave my word it would go to her education." I didn't know it then, but things were about to get even harder. A year later, Sandra got pregnant, and everything changed again. Dad was over the moon, and Sandra couldn't stop talking about how she was finally going to have her own child. Those words hurt more than any chore or rule she'd ever given me, because that's what I was to her, someone else's child, not her own, never her own. When Emma was born, I was 8 years old. I remember standing in the hospital hallway with Dad, peering through the nursery window at my new baby sister. She was so tiny, wrapped in a pink blanket, and Dad couldn't stop smiling. "You're a big sister now, Brittany," he said proudly. "You'll help take care of Emma, won't you?" I nodded eagerly, not understanding what that really meant. But I found out pretty quickly. When they brought Emma home, Sandra wasted no time in turning me into her personal assistant. "Brittany, bring me fresh diapers. Brittany, wash these bottles. Brittany, hold Emma while I make a phone call." The demands never stopped. By the time I was 9, I knew how to change diapers, prepare baby formula, and cook simple baby food. While other kids my age were playing outside after school, I was mashing bananas and stirring rice cereal for Emma. "But I want to go to Sarah's birthday party," I remember pleading one Saturday. "Emma needs you here," Sandra said firmly. "She's teething and fussy. Besides, someone needs to clean up the mess she made in the playroom." As Emma grew, so did my responsibilities. I had to watch her constantly, making sure she didn't fall while learning to walk or put dangerous things in her mouth. Meanwhile, Emma was showered with attention and gifts. Every tantrum was rewarded with a new toy or treat. When she turned 4, Emma realized she could get me in trouble whenever she wanted, and boy, did she use that power. One time, she deliberately spilled her juice all over her new dress, then ran crying to Sandra. "Brittany pushed me," she wailed. I spent that weekend grounded in my room. Another time she broke her expensive musical toy and blamed me. "Brittany was playing with it when it broke," she claimed. It didn't matter that I was doing homework at the time. I lost my allowance for a month to pay for a replacement. The worst was when she cut up her own party dress with scissors, then hid the scissors in my backpack. Sandra found them during one of her room inspections. "How could you be so jealous?" Sandra yelled at me. "Do you know how much that dress cost?" But I didn't. I tried to explain. "Go to your room," Dad interrupted. We'll discuss your punishment later." Emma stood in the doorway, smirking at me as I walked past. She'd learned early that she could get away with anything, while I'd get blamed for everything. Grandma Rose was my only escape from the madness at home. Every weekend I spent at her house felt like stepping into a different world, one where I could just be a kid. She lived in a cozy house filled with the smell of fresh-baked cookies and unconditional love. "Look at you, skin and bones," she'd say, loading my plate with pancakes. "That woman's got you running around like Cinderella." Unlike at home, at Grandma's house, I could laugh as loud as I wanted and didn't have to watch my every step. When Emma visited with me once, she quickly learned that her usual tricks wouldn't work there. "But I want ice cream before dinner," Emma had whined, stomping her feet. "Young lady," Grandma said firmly, "in this house, we eat our dinner first, and there's no rewards for tantrums." Emma never came back after that. "Grandma's house is boring," she told our parents. What she meant was that Grandma's house had rules that applied to everyone equally. Then came the day that changed everything. Emma had thrown a particularly dramatic fit about doing her homework, and Grandma happened to be visiting. "John," Grandma said to Dad, her voice stern, "that child is terribly spoiled. Sandra, you need to handle this better. You're raising a little tyrant." Sandra's face turned red. "How dare you criticize my parenting? You have no right." "I have every right when I see my granddaughters being treated so differently," Grandma shot back. "Look at what you're doing to Brittany." That night, I heard more shouting from downstairs. Sandra was crying, saying she wouldn't tolerate such disrespect. Dad, as usual, took her side. The next day, Sandra announced that we would no longer be visiting Grandma Rose. "But that's not fair," I protested. "Life isn't fair," Sandra snapped, "and if I catch you trying to contact her, you'll be grounded until college." College. That word became my lifeline. During the next couple of years, I threw myself into studying, counting down the days until graduation. Mom had left money for my education. I'd overheard Dad talking about it enough times. That money was my ticket out. Then came graduation day. I was still in my cap and gown when Dad and Sandra sat me down for a serious talk about college. Dad started, not meeting my eyes. "We've decided to save that money for Emma's education instead." The world stopped. "Your sister has such bright prospects," Sandra added smoothly. "And you? Well, you're more suited for practical work." Something inside me snapped. For the first time in my life, I screamed, "That's my money! Mom left it for me! You promised her, Dad!" "You're just a liar! You ungrateful girl!" Dad shouted, his face red. "After everything we've done for you, get out. Tomorrow you can start your adult life somewhere else." I didn't wait for tomorrow. I ran upstairs, threw some clothes and essentials into my backpack, grabbed the hidden photo of Mom, and walked out. My friend Jenny had always said I could stay with her family if things got bad, and now things had gotten as bad as they could get. Life as a waitress wasn't what I dreamed of doing after high school, but it paid the bills, barely. I started at the Silver Spoon, a busy downtown restaurant, working double shifts whenever I could. My feet ached every night, and I smelled like French fries and burger grease, but at least I was free. Jenny's parents were amazing, letting me stay with them for those first few months, but I knew I couldn't impose forever. That's when I met Maria, another waitress at the restaurant, who was looking for a roommate. "The apartment's tiny," she warned me, "and the neighbors are loud, but it's cheap." She wasn't kidding about tiny. Our shared apartment could barely fit 2 beds and a couch, but it was ours, and neither of us had to answer to anyone else. We worked the same shifts, shared grocery bills, and somehow made it work. "Any plans for school?" Maria would ask sometimes, as we counted our tips after closing. I'd just shake my head. With rent, utilities, and food, I could barely save anything. College felt like a distant dream that had died the night I left home. Then, on a random Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. I almost dropped the coffee pot I was holding when I saw the number. "Brittany, sweetheart, I've been trying to track you down. How's college going?" My throat tightened. I'm not in college, Grandma. What do you mean? Your father had Sarah's money set aside. I found myself telling her everything, the fight, getting kicked out, working as a waitress. By the end, I was crying in the restaurant's break room, and Grandma was silent for so long I thought we'd lost connection. Those miserable, selfish, she finally said, her voice shaking with anger. Listen to me, Brittany. I'm paying for your college. No arguments. Grandma, no, I can't let you. You're not letting me do anything. I'm doing it. Your mother was like a daughter to me, and I won't let them steal your future. Have you looked at any schools? I could try the local university. They have evening classes. Perfect. We'll get you enrolled for next semester. But, Brittany, she paused. Let's keep this between us. I don't want to deal with your father or that woman. I laughed through my tears. Trust me, Grandma. Neither do I. So that's how I became a full-time waitress and a part-time student. My days started at 5 a.m., with studying, then classes, then straight to work until closing. I'd come home exhausted, feet blistered, smelling like restaurant food, only to crack open my books again. Girl, when do you sleep? Maria would ask, concerned. Sleep is for the weak, I'd joke, downing my third cup of coffee. But for the first time since I'd left home, I felt like I was moving forward. Every test I passed, every paper I turned in, felt like a small victory, not just for me, but for Mom too. I might not have gotten to use her money, but I was still going to get the education she'd wanted for me. And the best part? Nobody from my family knew. They probably imagined me still serving tables, going nowhere in life. Let them think that. I was done trying to prove myself to people who'd never cared anyway. I was studying for my business management final when Emma's message popped up on Facebook. There she was, grinning beside a brand new red Mercedes, wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Look what Mom and Dad got me for my birthday. Not that you'd know anything about nice cars, huh? Still serving burgers? Must be fun watching everyone else live their best life while you're stuck being a waitress forever. The next photo was of her college acceptance letter. Got into State U. Mom and Dad are paying for everything. Tuition, housing, meal plan. They even promised me a spring break trip to Europe. But hey, at least you get free fries with your shift meal, right? I stared at my textbook, then back at her message. I could have told her about my 3.9 GPA, about how I was about to graduate with honors. Instead, I clicked block user and went back to studying. 3 weeks later, I graduated with my business degree. Only Grandma was there to watch me walk across the stage, but that was all I needed. We went out for dinner afterward, at a different restaurant, of course. Back at work, things started changing. Mr. Peterson, the owner, called me into his office one morning. Brittany, we've noticed how hard you work. How would you feel about becoming shift manager? You know this place inside and out, the staff respects you, and you've got the education for it now. That was just the beginning. 6 months later, I was promoted to floor administrator. My salary doubled, and suddenly I could afford to move out of the tiny apartment I shared with Maria. Years passed, and I kept climbing. By 30, I was running the whole place. The Silver Spoon had transformed from a regular downtown restaurant into one of the city's top dining spots. My name was in restaurant industry magazines. But my family still thought I was just a waitress. My new apartment was in one of those fancy high-rises downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city. Every morning I'd stand there with my coffee, watching the sunrise, thinking about how far I'd come from that scared teenager who ran away with just a backpack. It was a quiet Monday morning when I got the Facebook message from Mrs. Roberts, our old neighbor. We'd kept in touch over the years. She was one of the few people from my old life who'd been kind to me. She'd often slipped me cookies when Sandra was being particularly harsh, and once even helped me hide my mom's photo album when Sandra wanted to throw it away. Brittany, honey, I thought you should know. Emma's graduating next week, and she's planning something nasty. She's made reservations at the Silver Spoon. She knows you work there. She's been bragging to everyone about how she's going to have you wait on her table. Says it'll be hilarious to have her college dropout sister serve her graduation party. She's invited all her snobby friends, and even some of our old neighbors. She's been telling everyone how she's going to show them what a failure you turned out to be. I thought you should know." I sat back in my leather office chair, looking out over the restaurant floor through the one-way glass. The lunch rush was just beginning, and I watched my well-trained staff move efficiently between tables like a perfectly choreographed dance. A slow smile spread across my face as I opened our reservation system. Sure enough, there it was. Emma Wilson, party of 15, Saturday 7 p.m., graduation celebration. She'd even added a special note requesting the best table in the house, price is no object. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could cancel it. One click, and their reservation would disappear. I could have Janet call with some excuse about a plumbing emergency or a double booking. But no, I had a better idea. I picked up my phone and called Grandma. "You'll never guess who's coming to dine at my restaurant," I said when she answered. "Who?" "Emma and Dad and Sandra. They're coming to celebrate her graduation." Apparently, she specifically chose this place to humiliate her waitress sister. "Mrs. Roberts just warned me about it." Grandma's voice turned sharp. "Cancel their reservation." "You don't need that kind of negativity in your life, Brittany. Haven't they hurt you enough?" Actually, I couldn't help grinning as I looked at the framed Businesswoman of the Year award on my wall. "I have a better idea. How would you like to come to dinner that night? I'll give you the best table in the house, behind the marble column by the waterfall wall. You'll be able to see everything, but they won't see you." There was a pause. Then Grandma started laughing, that deep, mischievous laugh that always meant trouble when I was growing up. "Oh, you devious girl. Count me in. Should I wear my pearls for the occasion? Perfect. I'll have Carlos make your favorite chocolate soufflé. He's been practicing that new raspberry sauce you liked last time." "I'll bring my camera," Grandma chuckled. "This is going to be better than those reality TV shows you used to watch." After we hung up, I called in my assistant, Janet. "Clear my schedule for next Saturday evening, and make sure the staff knows I'll be handling a special table personally." "Of course, Miss Wilson. Anything else?" "Yes," I smiled, running my finger along the spine of my business management degree diploma hanging on the wall. "Make sure we have our finest champagne chilled, and have Miguel prepare his special caviar appetizers. I have a feeling it's going to be quite a memorable night." As I looked out over my restaurant again, I couldn't help but think how perfect this was. Emma had always loved her little power plays, her attempts to humiliate me. Well, this time she was walking right into my territory. And I was ready. Saturday evening arrived, and the restaurant was buzzing with its usual weekend energy. I watched from my office as my sister's party arrived. Emma in a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, Sandra in her typical overdone makeup, and Dad looking older than I remembered. They were surrounded by Emma's friends, all dressed to impress. I could see Grandma at her hidden table, pretending to read the menu while watching everything. She gave me a subtle wink when I passed by. "Excuse me," Emma's loud voice carried across the restaurant. "I specifically requested my sister Brittany as our server. Where is she?" I smoothed down my tailored suit jacket and approached their table. Emma's face lit up with malicious delight when she saw me. "Oh my God, everyone, this is my sister I was telling you about." She gestured at me like I was some exhibit at a zoo. "Still a waitress after all these years. I mean, I just graduated from state, and she's still carrying plates." The table erupted in laughter, led by Emma. Dad chuckled too, though he couldn't quite meet my eyes. Sandra just sat there with that superior smirk I remembered so well. "Look at her clothes," Emma stage whispered to her friends. "I guess that's what you can afford on a waitress's salary." I stood there in my Armani suit, letting them laugh. The irony wasn't lost on me. "What can I get for you this evening?" I asked professionally. Emma made a show of studying the menu. "Well, since you asked, I'll have the lobster thermidor." "Oh, wait." She looked up with fake concern. "Can you even afford to eat at a place like this? Do you know what lobster is?" More forced laughter from her friends, though some were starting to look uncomfortable. "And after dinner," Emma continued, her voice dripping with contempt, "I want you to personally wash our dishes. I'll even give you a nice tip. Maybe you can buy yourself some decent clothes for once." I could see Grandma gripping her table's edge so hard her knuckles were white. Some of the guests were whispering among themselves, clearly embarrassed by Emma's behavior. Sandra finally spoke up, her voice cold. "Really, Brittany, you should be grateful Emma chose your establishment for her celebration. Though I must say, I'm surprised they hired someone like you at such a nice place." "Actually," I said, my smile never wavering, "I won't be able to take your order or wash your dishes tonight." Emma's face darkened. "What do you mean you won't? I want to speak to your manager right now. I'll have you fired." "That won't be necessary," I said calmly. "The manager is already here." "Well, where are they?" Emma demanded, looking around. "You're looking at her." The silence that fell over the table was absolute. Emma's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Dad's face had gone completely white, and Sandra looked like she'd swallowed something sour. That's impossible," Emma finally sputtered. "You're lying. You're just a waitress." "Actually," came a familiar voice, "she's not just the manager. She owns 30% of this restaurant now." Grandma Rose emerged from her hidden table and walked over, her heels clicking on the marble floor. The look she gave Dad could have frozen hell over. "While you were busy spoiling one daughter and crushing the other, I put Brittany through college. She worked here as a waitress during the day and studied business management at night. Every single success she has, she earned herself." Emma jumped up, her face red. "That's not fair. You're lying. She's nothing but a successful businesswoman who owns part of one of the city's most prestigious restaurants," Grandma cut in. "Who bought her own luxury apartment while you're still living off Daddy's money. Is that what you were going to say?" Dad finally found his voice. "Mom, don't you dare mommy me John Wilson," Grandma snapped. "You let that woman turn you against your own daughter. You gave away Brittany's college money her mother left specifically for her. Well, guess what? I'm making things right. I've already changed my will. Everything I own goes to Brittany. Every penny." Sandra shot up from her chair. "You can't do that. Emma is your granddaughter, too." "Emma has had everything handed to her on a silver platter her entire life," Grandma replied coldly. "She doesn't need my money, though from what I've seen tonight, she could use some basic human decency." Emma completely lost it. She grabbed her wine glass and hurled it across the table, shattering plates and sending food flying. "This isn't fair. You're all just jealous of me." "Security," I called calmly. 2 men in black suits appeared instantly. "Please escort these people out." "You can't throw us out," Sandra screamed. "Do you know who we are?" "Yes, I do," I replied. "You're trespassers, causing a disturbance in my restaurant. Leave now, or I'll call the police and press charges for the damage to my property." Emma tried to grab another plate, but one of the security guards caught her arm. Dad just stood there looking lost as they were all led to the door. "Brittany," he called back weakly. "Please, can we talk?" I turned my back and walked away. Over the next few months, he tried everything: calls, emails, even showing up at the restaurant once. I had security turn him away. That was 5 years ago. The Silver Spoon is now the top-rated restaurant in the city, and I've opened 2 more locations. Grandma kept her word about the will, though thankfully she's still going strong at 75, tending her garden and coming to the restaurant every Sunday for her chocolate soufflé. Last week, I got another message from Emma. Something about how she's changed and wants to make amends. I did what I always do with messages from that part of my life: hit delete and went back to work. Some chapters are better left closed. Story 2. When we first met, I was Brittany, and I was employed at Carson & Associates in the marketing division. David was a salesperson who worked just next door to my office. It began rather casually. During lunch breaks, we kept bumping into each other in the workplace kitchen. While he unpacked his neatly packed bento boxes, I would reheat my depressing microwave dinners. Compared to my freezer meals, those seem much better. I mentioned that one day when he eyed his vibrant lunch buffet, he smiled and produced an additional pair of chopsticks. "Do you want to give it a try?" I'm very certain that my mother now regrets teaching me how to cook. It wasn't long before I lost interest in her unique recipes. The initial lunch appointment evolved into a daily lunch rendezvous. We would exchange life tales while seated at the little table by the window. I told him about my grandmother, who had given me my flat before she died, and my upbringing in the suburbs with my sensible parents. He seldom discussed his family, instead focusing on his career, interests, and aspirations. It took 3 months of lunches for him to formally ask me out. Tonight's dinner. Somewhere without plastic cutlery or a microwave. Our true tale started when I said yes. Our year-long romance was amazing. David was courteous, amusing, and considerate. It made perfect sense when he proposed that they move in together. There was plenty of space in my flat, and we were already spending most evenings together. With one exception, everything was ideal. His family had never met me. In the first several months of dating, he met Mai. But every time I mentioned seeing his family, David would sidestep the conversation or offer evasive justifications. After a few months of cohabitation, I eventually confronted him about it one evening. I stopped the movie we were watching together on the couch and looked up at him. "How come I haven't met your family yet, David? Do you feel embarrassed by me?" He ran his hands through his black hair and sighed deeply. "God, I'm not embarrassed of you, Brett. I feel embarrassed by them." I thought he was kidding, so I laughed. "They can't be that horrible, can they?" "Indeed they are." He spoke in a grave tone. "They're not the same. They believe it's all a joke. And I mean all of it. Even significant events. Serious circumstances. They make everything into a nasty practical joke." Not quite believing him, I recall raising my eyebrows. "What are you saying? Do you want some examples?" "All right." His daughter seemed nervous, so he sat up taller. I invited my first girlfriend home for supper when I was a high school student. Rubber worms were used in place of the noodles when my mother served spaghetti. At the table, my date vomited up and yelled. With the exception of Sarah and me, everyone found it amusing. She didn't talk to me again. I was waiting for the joke as I looked at him, but it didn't come. Consider the time I gave a significant presentation in middle school. My brother gave me a similar notebook with explicit drawings instead of the one I had. He shook his head as I opened it in front of the class. He kept telling me stories from his early years, each more horrific than the previous, and I was suspended for 2 weeks. Though I was unaware that I would soon be their next target, I started to see why he had been so reluctant to introduce me to his family. It was a Tuesday when David proposed. Not very fancy. It was just the two of us preparing breakfast in our kitchen. As I was cooking pancakes, he took out a ring and said, "Brett, I can't imagine my life without you." "Are you going to wed me?" I replied, "Sure, of course." Then, unavoidably, came the words I had been wondering and dreading. "It's probably time for you to get to know my family." The Thompson family lived in a lovely suburban 2-story colonial house. Before we even made it to the porch, Mrs. Thompson answered the door. She was a little woman with a big grin and David's warm brown eyes. Behind her stood Mr. Thompson, towering and dignified, with David's older brother James standing behind him. Oh. At last, Mrs. Thompson drew me into a close embrace. The woman who captured our David's heart is someone we have been eager to meet. The first exchange of words was unexpectedly casual. They questioned me about my work, my family, and how David and I met as we were sitting in their comfortable living room. I even laughed at a couple of their innocuous jokes. I began to unwind, believing David had overstated their propensity for practical jokes. I saw him keeping a wary eye on his family, as if he were waiting for a bomb to go off. I assumed he was acting suspiciously. "I'll get us some tea," Mrs. Thompson said with a smile. "How do you take yours, Brittany?" "Please, just a little milk." Everyone was still having good conversations when she came back with the tea tray. I quickly regretted taking a large gulp of my tea. The amount of salt and pepper in my mouth skyrocketed. I felt like I had swallowed fire because of the amount of pepper. It was too late when I spat the tea back into the cup. I had a burning sensation in my throat. I gasped and coughed and tears ran down my cheeks. The Thompsons started giggling. "Greetings from the family," James gave a hoot. "You'd better get accustomed to it. We enjoy making little jokes." "Mr. Thompson remarked, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. That's how we show love here." Desperate to get water, I dashed to the kitchen. I located a glass and added water and ice to it. I drank it in big gulps, my nose running from the pepper, and I could feel the tears from the living room and my well-placed mascara running down my cheeks. David was whispering angrily, and I could hear it. "What's the matter with you all? This isn't amusing. She will become my wife." "Oh, calm down," James said. "It's only a joke." My face was a tangle of mascara, smudged makeup, and running when I returned to the living room. After glancing at me, they burst out laughing once again. "She resembles a panda, you see." James doubled over with laughter and pointed at me. For David, that was the final straw. His cheeks flushed with rage. He leaped to his feet. "All of you are jerks. I didn't want to bring her here for just this reason." He took hold of my hand and dragged me to the car's door. David repeatedly apologized. With my cheeks still stinging from the humiliation and pepper, I just gave him a hug. David hadn't been lying about his family at all, I realized as we drove home. I had been warned by him. It's hard enough to plan a wedding, but worrying about your future in-laws makes it seem like a practical joke playground. David and I debated whether or not to invite his family for weeks. While we were addressing invitations one evening, David eventually stated, "We have to invite them. Even if I detest their antics, I would still regret not having them around since they are still my parents." The following day, he put the phone on speaker and contacted them, allowing me to hear my parents. "Pay close attention." He spoke in a firm tone. "I need your word, but you are welcome to attend the wedding. Don't play tricks. The most significant day of our life is today, not a circus, naturally." "My dear." His mom gave a little chirp. "We'll act appropriately, I swear." The wedding day got off to a great start. Everything went perfectly at the reception, and the ceremony was stunning. Although I saw David keeping a close eye on his family, they were actually acting normally. The cake-cutting ceremony followed. Our cake looked stunning. Delicate sugar blossoms cascade down the edges of 4 layers of white fondant. But there was a problem. It was adorned with lighted candles. Our strategy did not include it. I turned to David and said something about it, but before I could finish, there was a tremendous pop. Then another, and yet another. White cake and icing fragments flew everywhere as the cake erupted out of nowhere. My wedding gown was totally destroyed when the majority of it fell on me. There was utter stillness for a minute. Then I heard it. The sound of the Thompsons' laughter, which is familiar. They were pointing and yelling with pleasure, almost toppling over themselves. "Your face?" Between chuckles, James let out a gasp. "God, oh God, your face." Cake was streaming down my dress as I stood there, and my eyesight became blurry and I started crying. David's face became crimson with anger, and I saw it. "Leave now," he yelled at his relatives. "Leave my wedding now." His mother, appearing puzzled, remarked, "You're overreacting. Everybody enjoys a good wedding joke." David remained silent. Rather, he gestured to our hired security detail. Thank God he made that choice and had his family escorted away. In an attempt to remove the icing from my face, my mother hurried over with napkins. My bridesmaids were all around me, guarding me. Even David's Aunt Clara, whom I had only met that day, came over to assist, giving her leaving family nasty glances. As she wiped cake from my hair, she mumbled, "It's unbelievable that they're my brother's family." For crying out loud, this is not a fraternity party in college, it's a wedding. We managed to save the remainder of the reception somehow. It became a joke when my family and our friends came together to support us. Instead of working together at my cost, we were all in on it. There was a backup cake discovered. Our wedding planner apparently had experience working with challenging families, and after I changed into my backup outfit, we even got some good photos. After the disastrous wedding, everything calmed down, and David and I relished our quiet life in my grandmother's former flat, away from the turmoil of his family. We made a home office out of the spare bedroom. Before perhaps converting it into a nursery, we intend to utilize it in that capacity for a few years. However, plans are subject to change. I found out I was pregnant a little more than a year after our wedding. When I informed David, he was ecstatic and spun me around our kitchen, but he set me down right away. Then I became green. We made the decision to notify just my parents about it for the first several months. However, news spread somehow. One evening when David's phone rang, I was 7 months pregnant. "Mommy?" I recognized his expression and inquired. He gave a nod. "They are aware of the baby. Mom is certain that they should be able to meet their grandchild." I covered my bulging tummy with my hands out of habit. I firmly warned, "Don't play tricks on the baby." Not at all. Before picking up the phone, David gave his consent. Emma was flawless when she was born. David's beautiful brown eyes, 10 little fingers, and 10 small toes. For the first 2 months, we were able to keep the Thompsons out, but their tenacity eventually got to us. Only one visit. At our flat, where we have environmental control, David bargained with them. "And you're gone for good if there's even the slightest indication of a hoax." On a Sunday afternoon, they arrived. I kept a close eye on them over Emma, watching for any indication of trouble. They were nevertheless fairly typical. With tears in her eyes, Mrs. Thompson tenderly held Emma. Thompson showed us photos of his own father cuddling David when he was a newborn with pride. Others followed that visit. They would behave themselves and provide suitable presents when they visited every few weeks. I never felt completely at ease around them, though. Recalling the pepper tea episode from one of their trips, while David was changing Emma's diaper, I declined every tea request. Mrs. Thompson began discussing James. "Oh, last month he got married." Just in the courthouse, she casually mentioned such a little ceremony. Caroline declined to have a traditional wedding. She gave a disapproving shake of her head. "Really, I don't see why I held back from speaking. Why don't you understand?" Rather, I simply nodded while recalling my own damaged wedding gown and dessert that exploded. I was very certain of Caroline's reasoning for choosing a courtroom ceremony, and to be honest, I wished I had followed suit. I could see in my mind exactly how James and Caroline had spoken throughout that exchange. She had most likely heard the tales of my wedding, or perhaps she had even been the target of a few innocent practical jokes. In any case, clever girl, she had managed to keep them from using their unique sense of humor. You can't predict when life will fall apart. David said farewell to Emma before school, and to me before work on a soggy Tuesday morning, before leaving our house for the last time. At 9:17 a.m., an intoxicated driver jumped a red light. I was a widow by 9:20. At first, Emma didn't get it. She was just 7 years old, too young to understand what it means to never return. She wondered if her father would be home for supper after I informed her of his passing. Every time she inquired, my heart ached once again. The days before the funeral went by quickly. As I sat dazedly on the couch with Emma, my mother made preparations and almost moved in. I was no longer able to weep. I felt as though everything inside of me had been removed. James and his wife, Caroline, attended the funeral with the Thompsons. Until it was time for the eulogies, I hardly noticed them. I had previously mentioned my recollections of David as a parent and spouse, his soft humor and friendliness. How, just a month ago, he had taught Emma how to ride a bike. His parents then got up to talk. Mr. Thompson started. David always loved a good joke, and I felt my gut tighten. "Do you recall the time he was 5 years old, and we told him that his teddy bear had come to life and devoured all of his Halloween candy?" Mrs. Thompson added, laughing. "Or the time in college when, despite the fact that he never applied, we gave him a phony acceptance letter to medical school. He had a magnificent face." There was silence in the church. Nobody departed. As I glanced around, I saw faces contorted in shock and humiliation. Emma gripped my hand, perplexed. "He's up there now." Mr. Thompson kept smiling, most likely preparing the final trick for St. Peter. Something inside of me snapped. Anger began to shake my entire body. Emma must have sensed it since her troubled eyes were fixed on me. I went over to the Thompsons as they were getting ready for the reception following the service. Though faint, my voice had enough edge to shatter glass. "You dare," I gave a hiss. "You have no right to make fun of my husband's burial." "Oh, Brittany." My arm was grasped for by Mrs. Thompson. The humor would have been appreciated by David. He did. I recoiled from her contact. No. He put up with it. "You act carelessly and cruelly. None of you should ever see me again. You are no longer welcome in our life. I'm done with all of you, Emma. We are family, though." Mrs. Thompson objected. at last displaying worry. No, I spoke aggressively. Since we are not related, we do not degrade one another. Funerals and weddings are not ruined by family. We're finished. They were left standing there, presumably still perplexed by what they had done, when I turned and left. They would never comprehend, and they never had. 5 years went by in a flash. From a distraught 7-year-old to a reflective 12-year-old, Emma inherited her father's soft nature and compassionate eyes. In an attempt to bridge the David-shaped gap in our lives, I poured myself into becoming both a mother and a father. Through the grapevine, we learnt tidbits about the Thompsons. James now has 2 children. On social media, I had seen images of 2 youngsters grinning mischievously. I always scrolled right by, adamant about closing that chapter of our lives. Emma would occasionally inquire about them, particularly during the holidays or when her peers discussed their grandparents. I kept the jokes about the funeral and the bursting wedding cake from her. She didn't need that turmoil to add to her already complex sentiments of losing her father. The phone call then arrived. Christmas is 3 days away. Brittany. In other ways, Mrs. Thompson's voice was softer and older. Don't hang up, please. Emma was working on her schoolwork on the couch next to me, but I nearly did it nonetheless. Curious, she glanced up. Emma is missed, Mrs. Thompson went on. Would you kindly think about joining us for Christmas? Everyone in the family will be present. Their boys, James and Caroline. We want to see both of you. Emma, who had clearly worked out who was phoning, started nodding eagerly as I tried to say no. She had beseeching eyes. No pranks will be allowed at all. I spoke aggressively. No tricks, no jokes. Not at all. We assure it's just a typical Christmas meal. The voice of Mr. Thompson joined in. They were on speakerphone, I suppose. On David's memory, we vow, don't play tricks. Perhaps that was David's name. Or Emma's helping face, perhaps. However, I ended up agreeing. I answered, we'll come. I'm talking about the pranks, though. Emma and I went shopping after we hung up. We were doing it correctly if we were doing this. We selected the newest tablet for James and Caroline, the newest kitchen appliances for the Thompsons, and the newest toys for their boys. Do you think I received a great gift from Grandma and Grandpa? As we wrapped the presents, Emma inquired. They certainly did, my dear. I hoped I wasn't lying when I stated that. They've got 5 years to consider their options. Emma poured herself into writing cards and picking the wrapping paper. I prayed as I saw her enthusiasm increase. I wasn't bringing the Thompsons back into our life because I was making a terrible mistake. The Thompson residence was decked out with a wreath on the entrance and sparkling Christmas lights, just as I recalled. As we made our way up the path with our arms stuffed with thoughtfully wrapped gifts, Emma gripped my hand. When we got there, James and his family were already there. As she assisted us with our outerwear, his wife Caroline smiled at me with a kind, almost contrite grin. Behind their parents, their lads, Tommy and Mike, lingered timidly. The gift-giving got off to a good start. When Emma and I distributed our gifts, the response appeared sincere. Over the pricey coffee machine, Mrs. Thompson broke down in tears. The lads' cheeks brightened at their gaming systems, and Mr. Thompson was ecstatic with his new tablet. Then it was our time. Mrs. Thompson grinned broadly as she gave Emma a wrapped box, and Mr. Thompson gave me one of the same. Mrs. Her first present from her grandparents in 5 years, it made her fingers quiver a little when she opened it. Her expression when she opened the package is something I will always remember. There were some obviously marked down things from the clearance bin inside, as well as a plastic toy that was made to resemble dog excrement. Emma gazed at the contents, her bottom lip trembling. The laughs began at once. James and Mr. Thompson were virtually screaming. Even the males pointed at Emma's face as they joined in. God, take a look at them. Between chuckles, James let out a gasp. Their facial expressions are invaluable. Similar garbage, outdated confectionery, and products still bearing clearance stickers may be found in my own box. I responded in a deadly quiet voice, that's enough. Where are the actual gifts? Mrs. Thompson brushed away her tears of laughing. What are you saying? Those are the gifts. You're not serious. I gave them all a look. It's been 5 years since you last saw your grandchild, And as a Christmas gift, you offer her phony dog feces. They looked at each other bewildered. Mr. Thompson insisted it's humorous. Hurry up. Brittany gained the ability to accept humor. Without saying a word, something inside of me exploded as I saw Emma's face water. I got up and approached Mike and Tommy. I took back the game consoles and apologized to the lads. However, these are going back to the shop. Mom! As I collected the tablet and other presents from James and Caroline, they cried. What a nasty thing, Brittany. When I brought back their gifts because they were unkind, Mrs. Thompson objected. I betrayed her. For Christmas, you sent a 12-year-old girl who lost her father fake dog crap. You're also accusing me of being harsh. It was only a joke, James began. However, I interrupted him. I said, Emma, we're going out. Grab your coat. It was a calm journey home. Emma gripped her empty gift bag and gazed out the window. Finally, I murmured, I'm sorry, sweetie. I genuinely believed that they had changed. Don't worry, Mom, she said quietly. When we arrive home, may we brew hot chocolate and watch Christmas films? We can, of course. We'll celebrate Christmas on our own, only us, and we accomplished precisely that. The remainder of Christmas Day was spent in our pajamas, making cookies, watching holiday films, and attempting to block out the Thompsons and their sense of humor. Yesterday, when browsing Facebook the day after Christmas, I came across James's post titled, Terrible Christmas. My sister-in-law viciously reclaimed Christmas gifts from my sobbing kids, displaying her real colors. Family humor and customs are simply incomprehensible to certain people. My poor lads were devastated. Christmas was destroyed by Bad Aunt. The comments came pouring in. How awful! What sort of person accepts gifts from kids? Her voice is poisonous. I typed my response with trembling hands. Allow me to explain what actually transpired yesterday at Christmas. Do you wish to discuss cruelty? Allow me to explain your family's customs. Your parents gave birth to a 12-year-old kid who lost her father after 5 years of no communication. A Christmas gift, a toy that simulates dog poop. I was given clearance bin things that still had their price tags on them. Then they made fun of our suffering. However, this behavior is not new. They rigged our wedding cake to blow up in my face on my wedding day, and at my husband's burial, they felt it was fitting to transform their son's eulogy into a stand-up comedy performance about playing practical jokes on him as a kid. Do you wish to discuss harmful family customs? Let's have a conversation. I waited after hitting post. Other family members began to weigh in within minutes. God, please. Do you recall the graduation of Cousin Sarah? During the picture session, they substituted a humorous certificate for her diploma. During my baby shower, they added laxatives to the punch. They used the deceptive Torah scroll to destroy my son's bar mitzvah. The tide swiftly changed. People quickly began posting their own anecdotes of the Thompsons' antics on James's initial post. James's wife, Caroline, even expressed approval of a few of the remarks. That night, the phone call began. First, James, Brittany. I never gave it that kind of thought. Reading the tales of all. God, haven't we been terrible? Then, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, we had no intention of causing harm. Mrs. Thompson's voice wavered as she spoke. We believed that we were the only ones laughing. We assumed it was all for fun. This is how we've always been. It's simply the way we express affection, Mr. Thompson continued. However, we may have been displaying it incorrectly. I inhaled deeply. You must realize that your antics aren't amusing. They're mean. People are harmed by them. Your grandchild was harmed by them. Now we can see that? Mrs. Thompson muttered something. Will you ever pardon us? I honestly said, I don't know. I'm happy that you're at last understanding how your actions impact other people. However, I can't just ignore what has transpired. A big parcel arrived on a delivery truck 2 days later. Along with a sincere letter of apologies from Emma's grandparents, there came the newest iPhone, exactly the one Emma had been dreaming about. I returned the game systems to James's boys along with a message. Everybody is entitled to a true Christmas. We now have a cautious article 6 months later. Sometimes we get together for lunch or coffee in neutral locations. The Thompsons are making a concerted effort to reform. No more harsh jokes, no more pranks. Emma occasionally video chats with her cousin. Additionally, I have witnessed sincere regret in my in-laws' eyes. David would be pleased with this development. I believe he always believed his family would eventually get it. Perhaps they do at last. Story 3. I never imagined that I would be sharing this tale, yet here I am. My name is Jenna, and I considered my life to be rather nice until lately. I was employed at a mid-sized accounting business, had a cozy suburban flat, and what I thought was a strong marriage to my 10-year spouse, Mark. Above all, we had Sarah, our lovely daughter, who was the source of our happiness. I met Mark in college. He was the endearing business major who had a ready-made response. I was also the shy girl who liked numbers more than people. We clicked somehow. We both found respectable professions after college, got married, and began establishing our lives together. 2 years later, when Sarah arrived, everything seemed ideal. The day that everything changed is still fresh in my mind. It was a typical March Tuesday night. Mark and I were seated at our kitchen table. Sarah had already eaten and gone to bed. He was wearing the expression that indicated he was thinking about something serious. "Jenna," he continued, fumbling with his coffee mug, "we need to talk." Whatever was coming wasn't good, and I knew it then. "What's the matter?" Even though I knew there had been indicators, I still asked. Working late into the night, unidentified phone calls, the widening emotional gap that existed between us, he inhaled deeply. "I've met another person." I felt like I was punched in the stomach by those 4 words. Rebecca was her name. She worked in his department, he informed me. For months they had been dating. "I apologize," he replied, as though it resolved the issue. "I believe I'm in love with her, even though I never intended for this to happen." As he went on to discuss how we had drifted away and how Rebecca knew him more than I ever could, I sat there feeling blank. I could only imagine Sarah sleeping soundly upstairs, oblivious to the fact that her entire life was about to be upended. The weeks that followed were a haze of difficult talks and mediation sessions. For Sarah's sake, we decided to keep things amicable. Ultimately, Mark got the vehicle and boat toys that I never really cared about, and I got our flat. We negotiated a custody agreement where Sarah would live mostly with me, but still spend time with her father on a regular basis, and he agreed to pay considerable child support. During our last mediation session, Mark said, "I know I've hurt you, but I'd like to do it correctly, by Sarah." I simply nodded. Could I say anything else? Even if he had deceived me after 10 years of love, the man was still Sarah's father. I had to put aside my personal grief and rage in order to co-parent with him for her sake. A year went by quickly, filled with workdays, homework assistance, and getting used to our new schedule. I was just beginning to feel like I had my feet under me again, and Sarah had just turned 9. The wedding invitation followed. For Sarah, of course, not for me. Rebecca and Mark were getting married. Together, they purchased a home. In other words, they were relocating to her home. With a well-kept yard and a 3-car garage, this expansive 2-story home in a desirable area of town shouted, "Successful couple." I assisted Sarah in getting ready on the morning of the wedding. I braided her hair the manner she liked, and she wore a pale blue outfit that we had chosen together. "Mom, are you certain you don't mind my leaving?" she inquired, observing me while I pinned back a wayward strand in the mirror. I met her gaze in the mirror and said, "Of course I am, sweetheart. Your stepmother will be her. The positive friendship between you two is crucial, but don't you feel depressed?" I spun her around so she was looking at me. "Sarah, pay attention to me. The things that transpired between your dad and myself are mature. You are not involved in it. I want you to get along well with Rebecca and your father. Don't pick a side." "All right." She gave me a strong embrace. "There is no better mother than you." I cleaned the flat all day while Mark picked her up in his brand new SUV, and without a doubt, without considering the wedding. Sarah's return home that evening. She was bursting with tales about the cake, the ceremony, and the large home where she would have a private room for guests. Life continued. I poured myself into my work and Sarah's care. We established our own small rituals, such as watching films on Tuesday nights, making pancakes on Saturday mornings and taking Sunday-long walks in the park. Everything was okay, as Sarah divided her time between Mark's house and our flat. Not very good, but passable. After spending a weekend at her dad's, Sarah came pouring through the door one day, virtually overflowing with news. "Mom, you know what?" Dropping her rucksack at the entrance, she let out a cry. "Rebecca is expecting a child. There will be a younger sibling for me." Despite feeling as though I had been hit in the belly, I maintained a neutral expression. "Really? That is significant news. Yes. Her tummy is somewhat visible already. Dad is ecstatic. He kept talking about making a nursery out of the guest room." Unconfident in my ability to talk, I nodded. "Please don't let this alter the way we handle Sarah," was all I could think. Keep her from being the first kid to be forgotten. Sarah was meant to remain at her dad's for a week, but she left early a month later. She carried her bag through the door with a disgruntled expression. She stated, "Rebecca is really sick," as she collapsed into the couch. "She gets upset about everything and constantly vomiting up." She said that my laughter was too loud and that the scent of her father's coffee made her weep this morning. She then requested that I return home early. I touched her hair as I sat down beside her. Pregnant women occasionally experience it. They are extremely sensitive to everything because of their hormones. Having had morning sickness for months when pregnant with Sarah, I was all too familiar with the symptoms of pregnancy. Therefore, it was hard for me to blame Rebecca for feeling overburdened. Mark arrived at our flat to pick up Sarah for another visit a few weeks following her early return. Sarah's rucksack bounced against her back as she hurried to his car, and I watched from the window. For the following 2 weeks, everything appeared to be as usual as ever. Every evening, I gave Sarah a call. We had brief but comforting discussions. "It's all right, Mum," she would say. "Our meal was pizza." I'm learning how to play chess from her dad. But something didn't feel right when she got home. She walked more slowly than normal, as if she were carrying a burden on her shoulders, and there were shadows beneath her eyes that had not been there before. "Are you all right, honey?" As I assisted her in unpacking her suitcase, I inquired. "You appear worn out." She waved away my worry and answered, "Oh, I'm fine. I have been lending Rebecca a hand around the house, housework and such. Due to the baby, she is now unable to accomplish anything. I even acquired the skill of cooking pasta." I felt a surge of pride. I had always made an effort to encourage Sarah to be helpful and kind to other people. "That's very kind of you, honey," I murmured, embracing her. "You have my admiration for lending a hand." For a few weeks, everything returned to normal until my phone rang one evening. It was Mark. "Hey, Jenna," he began in a measured and cautious tone. "I have a favor to ask of you. Sarah was to stay with me for the following month as per our custody arrangement. Mark, however, had different plans. If Sarah stayed with us instead, is that acceptable?" he inquired. Recently, she and Rebecca have been growing closer. They have become quite close, and Sarah has been a huge help around the house. Considering, I squeezed my lips together. "I'll ask Sarah what she desires." I could detect Sarah's hesitancy when she heard her father's request when I phoned her on the phone. However, Mark's tone shifted to one of excitement. He said, "Oh, and I have a surprise for you, sweetheart. You've been talking about this new computer game, and I just got it. The dragon-winged one. Can I go, Mom?" Sarah's eyes glowed as she faced me. "Please." How could I respond? "If that's what you want, of course." The following 2 weeks went by in silence. Sarah appeared to be getting used to a schedule at their home, while Mark handled all of the school runs. She kept me updated with images of herself playing her new game, cooking in their opulent kitchen, and relaxing on their comfortable couch in the living area. On the surface, everything appeared to be fine. Still, there was a persistent thought in the back of my mind. I put the feeling that the pictures were faked aside. Most likely, I was just being too suspicious and allowing my emotions towards Mark and Rebecca to influence my decisions. The important thing was that Sarah seemed content in the photos, right? After that week, Sarah eventually returned home, and I hardly recognized my own daughter. She had black bags under her eyes, which no 12-year-old should have, and her face looked drawn and pale, as though she had been hauling bricks. Her shoulders drooped. "Honey, Sarah. What's the matter? I reached for her and asked. She only gave me a feeble wave. I'm exhausted, Mother. Am I able to sleep? You want dinner first, don't you? However, she had already started to drag herself to her chamber. She simply fell onto her bed and passed asleep like a light without even changing into her pajamas. There was a serious problem. I didn't call Mark until she was safely sleeping. What's happening there? I insisted. Sarah seemed to be totally worn out. Well, let's get started. Mark let out a sigh. He was rolling his eyes, and I could almost hear it. Jenna, you're exaggerating as always. Taking things too far. Have you had a chance to visit our daughter? It appears that she hasn't slept for days. She did some chores for Rebecca. She simply isn't used to handling household tasks, most likely because she is spoilt at home. Even though the jab hurt, I persisted. Mark, this isn't about me. There's a problem. She's all right, he demanded. Today's kids are very sensitive. Nobody is ever harmed by a little effort. She will adapt. While I waited for Sarah to wake up that night, I didn't get much sleep. The following day, when she eventually came out of her room, I prepared her favorite meal and sat her down at the kitchen table. Pancakes with chocolate chips. I put a platter in front of her and murmured, Sweetheart, tell me what's actually happening at your dad's place, please. Sarah avoided looking at me as she moved the pancakes around with her fork. It isn't anything. Sarah, please, I see how exhausted you are. Tell me whatever you want. You are aware of that. She remained silent for a while. Then the words began to flow. Rebecca has stopped doing anything. She claims that the baby prevents her from doing so. But she forces me to do everything, Mum. I have to hoover, dust, mop, and clean the entire house. I must cook until she forces me to use the stove and chop veggies. Despite my fear of it. Beneath the table, my fists tensed. How about unwinding? Do you not have any personal time? Sarah's bottom lip quivered. One day, after cleaning, I wanted to watch TV, but Rebecca said the loudness made her headache. She just shut it off and instructed me to keep quiet and go to my room. She claims that I walked too heavily, laughed too loudly, and had already taken out my phone to call Mark. On the fourth ring, he answered, Now what, Jen? Now what? Could you perhaps explain why our daughter is receiving Cinderella-like treatment in your home? My voice trembled with rage. Mark, she's 12 years old. She isn't supposed to cook and clean the whole house. He dismissed the idea that Sarah was exaggerating. The TV was excessively loud, so we switched it off when Rebecca asked for a little assistance. This isn't what you're making it into. She is afraid to operate the stove. Mark, she's worn out. This is unacceptable. The cue died. He had hung up on me. Incredulous, I gazed at my phone before turning to face Sarah, who was still shoving pancakes about her plate. My daughter, my lovely, compassionate daughter, was being used by the very people who were supposed to be looking out for her. A few days later, things got even more complex. My phone rang when I was at work going over quarterly reports. My heart leaped into my throat the moment I saw it was Sarah's school. It was Sarah's homeroom teacher, Mrs. Henderson, Mrs. Mitchell. I needed to discuss Sarah's recent performance with you. I tightened my hold on my pen. Is everything all right? It's that simple. Over the past month, Sarah's grades have drastically declined. She is dozing off in class. She appears worn out and frequently leaves her homework unfinished. This development is alarming because I know she has always been an excellent student. Is everything at home okay? My pen broke in two. I appreciate you informing me, Mrs. Henderson. I'm working on it and am aware of the problem. I tried calling Mark directly to voicemail as soon as I hung up. I texted him, Sarah has to be discussed. Her academic performance is declining. Give me a call right now. Almost instantly, a small red notice showed up beneath my message, but there was no reply. Not on that particular day. Not the following one. For 2 weeks, no. I was prepared when Mark eventually arrived at our door for his planned meeting with Sarah. She will not go, I said, obstructing the entrance. His expression clouded. Please pardon me. I heard you. Her academic performance is deteriorating. Her instructor is concerned because she is constantly tired. Mark, this is unhealthy. This is not possible, he snarled. Our custody arrangement is in place. I'll take you to court if you break it. Proceed. How you're allowing your pregnant wife to utilize our kid as free domestic help is something I'd want to explain to a judge. Mark, his face flushed with rage, shoved past me into the flat. Then he noticed Sarah loitering in the corridor, and his demeanor abruptly changed, becoming softer. "Princess," he replied in a softer tone, "gather your belongings. Don't pay attention to what your mother says. There won't be any more housekeeping for you to do, I swear. I simply miss you, my love. I want to hang out with my girlfriend." I noticed Sarah hesitating as I looked at her face. She gave me a confused look. "Give it a minute." Mark stood at the door as I said, dragging her away. I bent down and said, "Take your phone with you," in her ear. "Activate the voice recording application. Note everything that occurs there. What Rebecca tells you. What your father says. We'll keep it a secret. All right?" Sarah's eyes became a little wider. Then she nodded slightly at me. I winked and squeezed her hand. I said, "Remember, don't tell them you're recording. This is private between us." I stood observing Mark as he checked his phone and pretended not to be upset, while she rushed to prepare a suitcase. After 5 minutes, Sarah was prepared. I felt like I was sending my child into combat with nothing but a mobile phone for armor, so I gave her a deep embrace before she went. However, the finest weapons aren't often the ones that are visible. It was a torturous week. I would go for my phone whenever it buzzed, just to see another little text from Sarah. "I'm all right. It's all right. Do not be concerned." Mothers, however, are able to detect problems. And every part of me cried out that nothing was at all okay. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the doorbell rang. When I answered the door, Sarah was standing there, shivering, drenched, and by herself. I wasn't expecting anyone. I pulled her in as I cried, "Oh my God." "Sarah? What took place? How did you arrive here?" I took off running. Her voice broke as she muttered, "Boarded the bus." As I assisted her in removing her damp jacket, I glanced at her hands. Her palms were rough and red, and calluses were growing on them. She flinched in agony as she attempted to remove her shoes, and she could hardly keep her eyes open. Trying to stabilize my kid, I responded, "First things first. Let's feed and warm you." I prepared her favorite comfort meal, tomato soup and grilled cheese, and I watched as she almost drank it. I didn't dare to ask her what had occurred until she had done eating. "My dear..." She took her phone out of her pocket without saying a word. She gave it to me with trembling hands. "The recordings," she muttered. "Pay attention." What I heard when I opened her voice recorder app chilled me to the bone. "You clumsy, foolish girl." The speaker crackled with Rebecca's voice. "Is there nothing you can do correctly? Take a look at these floors. Spots are still visible everywhere. I'm doing my best." "Your best isn't good enough," said Sarah in a little voice. "Repeat. After you're finished, you have to make dinner and fold the clothes. However, I'm afraid to use the stove. Leave my eyes. Simply leave. Useless." I played with trembling hands, recording. Following the recording. With each one, Rebecca's tone became more ruthless. "You believe that you are unique? Await the arrival of my child. After that, you'll truly understand what work is. The babysitter is free. It is what you will be." Then came the heartbreaking talk. Sarah beseeching her father, "Please, Dad. I'm being forced to do everything by Rebecca. I'm exhausted. Quit lying." Mark's voice was unidentifiable and icy. "You're simply indolent. Are you aware of the amount I provide your mother? Helping out around the house is the least you can do. But pay close attention to me, Dad." He lowered his voice to a menacing murmur. "I'll take your mother to court if you tell her about any of this. You won't see her ever again, and I'll receive exclusive custody. You get it?" I felt a hatred I had never experienced before as I stared at my daughter, who was curled in her chair. Making a youngster perform chores wasn't the only goal here. This was mistreatment. I held Sarah till she stopped shivering when she started crying. Making commitments I meant to fulfill. "Sweetheart, I will no longer allow them to harm you. Now you're safe." I called my sister once she had calmed down. "I need a favor, Amy," I said, outlining the circumstances. She was there in 20 minutes. Anxiety and anger filled the trip to Mark's residence. He pulled the door open after I continuously pressed the doorbell. "What on earth are you?" I pushed into the foyer, past him. "Where is she?" He made a demand. Sarah took off running. "I am aware that you put her through that. Jenna, you are to blame for this. She is completely spoilt by you, allowing her to do what she pleases." With one hand covering her big tummy for protection, Rebecca waddled up behind him. As the ideal encouraging wife, she nodded in agreement with Mark's remarks. "She has become a spoilt brat because of you," Mark went on. "She believes she is too skilled to assist with household chores." Intimidated her. Ice cold, I sliced into my voice. "My 12-year-old daughter was bullied by both of you." After exchanging glances, they burst out laughing dismissively. "Oh, please." Rebecca gave an eye roll. "Sarah's imagination is incredibly vivid. She makes up stories all the time." I took my phone out. "Really? Fabricating tales such as this?" I hit the play button. The room echoed with Rebecca's voice. "You clumsy, foolish girl. Is there nothing you can do correctly?" Shock slackened their faces. I performed more. Rebecca's nasty remarks about exploiting Sarah as a babysitter were intercepted by Mark's threats. Everything. Mark was the first to recover. His face is getting hideous. "Do you believe that this makes a difference? My solicitors are costly. The state's best. They will rip you to pieces. I'm being harmed by you." Rebecca clutched her stomach and let out a sharp yell. "Your argument is making me anxious. All I wanted was your daughter's assistance." Despite my anger, I felt strangely at ease as I turned to face her. "Wait for your own child if you are so determined to raise a partner. Your servant is not my daughter." She spat in anger, her cheeks flushing crimson. At last, I turned to face Mark. "You know what's so pitiful? You didn't abandon me." Although it hurt, I moved on. "The fact that you let down the one person you never ought to have let down is pitiful. You let your wife to mistreat our daughter while you stood by. You even assisted her in doing it. Does that make you a bad father?" I didn't hold out for a response. They were standing in their ideal home with their ideal lawn. When I pivoted and left, they could keep everything. I had something far more valuable to safeguard. The next morning, I gave Linda Stevenson, the top family law lawyer I could locate, a call. It was a grueling legal struggle. In an attempt to incite my daughter against her father and his new family, Mark's high-priced solicitors portrayed me as a spiteful ex-wife. They said that I was envious of their ideal new life, that I was cruel for preventing Sarah from bonding with her pregnant stepmother, and that I was using Sarah as a tool to get even with Mark. In court, however, we played the tapes. As Rebecca reprimanded Sarah and Mark for frightening our kid with their casual cruelty, I saw the judge's countenance grow gloomy. With the exception of those condemning words pouring over the speakers, the courtroom went silent. Even Mark's affluent solicitors were unable to justify their own recorded statements. Sarah had the courage to testify. Despite her diminutive appearance, she spoke clearly about what had transpired while seated in the witness chair. As she talked about how she was terrified to use the cooker but had to cook nonetheless, how her hands hurt from cleaning floors, and how she'd fallen asleep in class from exhaustion from all the chores, I watched a few jury members wipe away their tears. The decision was final when it was rendered. Unless I specifically allowed it, Mark would no longer have any visiting privileges after the judge awarded me full custody. He had no legal right to see Sarah without my consent, but he would still be required to pay child support. When the verdict was announced, Mark blew up. His face was flushed with anger as he rushed up to me outside the courthouse. "Are you happy now?" he spit. "Isn't this what you've always wanted?" "Retaliation, because Rebecca is the reason I left you." I felt nothing except sympathy as I quietly gazed at him. "You don't understand, do you? It was never about us. Sarah was the subject of this. But Mark, congrats. You've discovered the ideal companion. She is as cunning and vicious as you are. You both deserve one another." Our last meaningful talk ended there. It's been months. As soon as Sarah was not worn out from being treated like a servant, her grades significantly improved. She smiled again, and her chuckle. Our house was once again filled with that lovely chuckle that used to irritate Rebecca so much. Our mutual acquaintances informed us that Rebecca had given birth to a boy. Although Mark's texts requesting to visit Sarah were at best hesitant, they eventually ceased completely. I occasionally questioned if he would ever really comprehend what he had lost, not just his daughter, but also the opportunity to be the parent she so well deserved. I heard Sarah, who is now 14 years old, discussing the entire matter with her closest friend the other day. "You miss seeing your dad, don't you?" her companion inquired. Sarah acknowledged that sometimes it's better to avoid him than to be treated as like I'm unworthy. In addition, I have the world's greatest mother. I frequently consider how far we've come when I gaze out the window. We may not own beautiful vehicles or boats, and the flat may not be as opulent as Mark's large home, but we do have something far more precious: respect, love, and peace. Sarah no longer has to be afraid to enter her own house. She doesn't need to be a scapegoat or someone's servant. She is free to be herself, an intelligent, humorous, and kind adolescent who is deserving of all the joy in the world. As for me, I've discovered that the happy ending isn't always what you expected. It's better sometimes. On some Saturday mornings, it's simply a mother and her daughter cooking pancakes, watching films and laughing as loudly as they want their house to be.